Chennai or Madras is often considered to be a cinema capital. We always speak of the cinema industry in this city as Collywood because at one time all the studios were in Kodambakkam. And at one time, many of the theatres were on Mount Road. Today, there are hardly any theatres. In this series, of which this is the first part, we will be looking at the history of some of the old theatres of Madras, that is Chennai. And in this episode, we will be looking at the history of the first three theatres of this city. They were all theatres of the silent era. Come, let us explore that history. Cinema was first exhibited as an art form and as a technology in Paris in 1895 by the Lumiere brothers. The next year, in March 1896, that is, India had its first screening of what was then known as the cinematograph at the Watson's Hotel in Bombay. And then, towards the end of the year, it was announced that Madras city would have its first screening of cinema. This was being organized by Stevenson, who was working with the Madras Photographic Store, which was located on Mount Road. The company was specializing in the marketing of photographic equipment, camera, photographic film, and then what was very popular in those days, the magic lantern. The magic lantern was basically the father of the slide projector. You put up an image before lens in an inverted fashion, and this would then get projected onto a large screen. So photographs and educational slides could be shown this way. The Madras Photographic Store was a specialist in all these equipments. And Stevenson decided that he could leverage this by conducting the first film show of this city. You must be wondering as to where that first cinema show was conducted. That was at the Victoria Public Hall, the building which still stands today and which is undergoing extensive renovation now. It was in December 1896 that this city witnessed its first exhibition of cinema. For 3 days, the program was conducted, December 8th, 9th and 10th of 1896. What was shown was a series of short films interspersed with magic lantern shows. Of course, the people who had come to witness were very familiar with magic lantern shows, but what they had never seen was cinema. It was advertised as the latest development in the world of photography because it needed photography to show what it was. Otherwise, people would not be able to understand. And what was shown were several items such as the arrival of the Russian emperor, the Tsar, in Paris, the saddling of a donkey, and the sailing of a ship. Despite all the excitement that you would have thought that cinema would have generated in this city, that first screening was not very successful. There were two reasons for this. One was December is always the season of cyclones, and 1896 was no different. There was a huge cyclone on the very day that the first film screening was going to take place. The other reason was the date of the screening coincided with the inauguration of the government museum in Egmore, and everybody had gone there. And so the first screening was not really a successful one. But cinema had come to stay in this city, and happily for us, Stevenson himself would become a very successful figure. As per the renowned historian Stephen P. Hughes, Stevenson decided that his future was in marketing projection equipment. He quit his job at the Madras Photographic Store and went on to display projection or cinema at various places including Hyderabad and other princely states, and eventually wound up displaying Calcutta's first cinema projection a few months later. He went on to become a success in that field. After that display at Victoria Public Hall, this city had to wait for quite some time before it got a theatre. Till such a time, films were displayed on mobile projection units at various locations. These were what would later become known as tent cinemas or tent theatres. In fact, wherever there was a theatre for the staging of plays, those venues were all used for the projection of films. When we read T.K. Shanmugam's Yenadu Nadaga Varkai, we read of three such facilities that existed in this city: the Empress Theatre, the Grand Theatre, and the Royal Theatre. The Empress Theatre, he says, stood where the Star Talkies in Triplicane survived till very recently. The Grand Theatre, he says, was somewhere in North Chennai, where Murugan Talkies came up later. Murugan Talkies itself has got a very old history that we will cover later. And the Royal Theatre, he says, was where the Salt Cottors stood in North Chennai off Waltax Road. All of these were places where theatre was staged, and these were also used for the projection of films. Therefore, the public could go at any point of time and see what they wanted to and go away. It was only in 1911 that the city of Madras got its first permanent theatre. And that, surprise, surprise, was organized by a woman, Mrs. Klug, who was clearly of German origin. She was advertised as the proprietrix of what was known as Mrs. Klug's Bioscope. And the premises was at 16 Broadway, which is today known as Prakasam Salai. Mrs. Klug's Bioscope was inaugurated in April 1911, and every evening it had what were known as continuous shows between 6 and 11 p.m. When I say continuous shows, you could walk in at any time and walk out at any time. And this way the public was attracted, because while they were walking down Broadway, if they had an hour to spare, they could just walk into Mrs. Klug's Bioscope, buy the ticket, sit and watch what was being screened, and then leave at any time that they wanted to. Sadly for us, the Mrs. Klug's Bioscope did not survive for very long, and we know that by 1913 it had ceased to exist. Where was it on Broadway has remained a mystery. But once again, Professor Stephen Hughes has identified the building based upon what he has researched. He had come to know that the building was on one side of what was known as Lone Square and diagonally opposite the catering company of Harrison's of Broadway. Lone Square is today's Sriram Park. Harrison's of Broadway does not exist any longer, but its site is very easily identified. And opposite that is even today a gentleman's club known as the Sukrita Lakshmi Vilasa Sabha. It was on the first floor of this building that we had Mrs. Klug's Bioscope, which effectively was the first theatre of this city. Prior to this, in 1907, we get to read of a theatre called Lyceum, which existed on Mount Road, and we also get to hear of a theatre called the Lyric, which stood on the intersection of Ellis Road, Walaja Road and Mount Road. That is roughly where the music store of Miss Quith was, later to become Muse Musicals and moving further down Mount Road. On the second floor of Miss Quith and Company, we know that the Lyric Theatre existed for a while, but we have no idea whether it screened films or whether it was just staging plays. All we know is that in 1913, the Lyric was burnt to the ground and the property was acquired by J.F. Madan, a Parsi distributor and exhibitor of films, and on that site he would construct the Elphinstons Theatre. And therefore, the Lyric had a very short existence, but certainly an existence that was much longer than Mrs. Klug's Bioscope. We now come to a building that still stands on Mount Road, and that is the Philatelic Bureau of the Department of Posts. This was the venue of a theatre as well, known as the Electric Theatre. This was constructed in 1913 by a man called Warwick Major. There are many inaccurate accounts about this building as well as the person who founded it. For instance, for a long period of time, it was believed that this theatre had been constructed in 1900 and therefore it was the city's oldest. But in reality, it was constructed only in 1913. There was also a fallacy going around that the man was Major Warwick of the army. In reality, he was just Mr. Warwick Major. Major was his surname. From a reading of Pammal Sambandha Mudaliyar's Nadaga Medai Ninaivugal, we can easily find that Warwick Major was running a theatre in Colombo at the Jindupitiya Hall in 1911 or thereabouts. Then he comes to Madras and he was then the manager for a while of the Victoria Public Hall as well. And then in 1913, he constructs the Electric Theatre and was running it for quite some time, for a couple of years. In 1915, the building was acquired by the Department of Posts and Telegraphs as it existed then. Many years later, it would be converted into the Philatelic Bureau. And so today, if you discount Victoria Public Hall, which was more a town hall, we certainly have the first theatre of the city, Mrs. Klug's Bioscope, still standing but not in great condition in Prakasam Salai. And we also have the third theatre, Electric, which is splendidly maintained by the Department of Posts and is now the Philatelic Bureau. If you go deep inside the building, you will come to the northern wall, and there you can see from its flat surface that it was once upon a time used as a screen for films. That then is the story of the silent theatres that have survived in this city. What did they do for volume or for sound or for audio? As the film was being screened, there would be people who would be paid to describe what was going on, and there would be an orchestra that would play music appropriate to the situation that was being displayed on screen. And that is what they did for creating sound effects. But then talkies were not very far away. By 1931, cinema had begun to talk in Madras, and then you had a new brand of theatres known as the talkies. We will explore their history in future episodes, and I promise to bring several exciting stories from them for you. If you like this episode, like it, share it, and subscribe to this channel, and we will be back with plenty more episodes from the history of Madras, that is Chennai. Bye for now.